Hi, and welcome back to Heimler's History, U.S. Government Edition. Now in this video, we're going to lift the hood on the U.S. Constitution and see how that baby purrs. And just so you know, nobody thinks that the Constitution is a perfect document like coming down from Mount Sinai written by the very finger of God. But nevertheless, it is a magnificent document of rare political genius. And if you doubt that, as I've said in other videos, then consider the following scenario. If you had the choice between keeping the Constitution as it is, warts and all, or throwing it out and letting the current batch of politicians rewrite the Constitution, which one would you choose? That's what I thought. Okay, the first thing we need to understand about the Constitution is how power is distributed. And there are three kinds of powers we need to look at. There are exclusive powers, shared powers, and checking powers. Exclusive powers refer to the powers that each branch of government has that the other branches don't have. Those powers are exclusive to that branch. Congress, which is the legislative branch, has the following power exclusive to that branch: taxation, coining money, establishing post office, regulating interstate and foreign commerce, and declaring war. And in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress's exclusive powers are further expanded with what's called the Necessary and Proper Clause, or sometimes referred to as the Elastic Clause, which gives Congress the elasticity to, quote, make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. Which is to say that Congress can pass any law which supports its exclusive powers, even if such powers are not explicitly stated in the Constitution. For example, it was Alexander Hamilton who appealed to the Elastic Clause as justification to establish a national bank. Now, the Constitution says absolutely nothing about Congress's ability to establish a national bank, but it does say that Congress has the exclusive power of the regulation of interstate commerce and taxation. So Hamilton argued that it was necessary and proper that Congress should establish a bank in which to deposit those funds. Now, the executive branch, or the president, was also given exclusive powers in the Constitution. The president is the commander-in-chief of the military, can issue pardons, and can receive ambassadors and foreign ministers. But the most significant power given to the president is contained in what's called the Executive Powers Clause, which reads thusly: the executive powers shall be vested in a president of the United States of America, and the president's job is to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed. Now, the judicial branch, or the Supreme Court, got almost no love from the constitutional framers because they thought the judicial branch was the least dangerous of all the branches. So really, the Constitution just gives the Supreme Court the following exclusive powers: lifetime appointments for justices who aren't turds, and independence from the other two branches so that they can make their decisions without political pressure. Okay, so that's all the exclusive powers that the Constitution grants to the different branches of government. Let's talk now about shared powers. Shared powers refers to the kind of power that two or more branches of the government, share. For example, the president appoints justices to the Supreme Court, but those justices must also be confirmed by the Senate. Or take war powers. It's true that the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but the president is not allowed to declare war. That power belongs to Congress. So that's what we mean by shared powers. Now let's talk about the constitutional provisions for checking powers. Checking powers are there to make sure no one branch of government oversteps its bounds in terms of power. And Congress has two very important checking powers: impeachment and the power of the purse. Impeachment refers to Congress's ability to try and, if necessary, remove the president if he turns out to be a grade A turd. And according to the Constitution, turdish behaviors include treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And just in case you were wondering, Congress has impeached only two presidents: Andrew Johnson in 1868 and Bill Clinton in 1998. But both were acquitted and allowed to remain in office. Now, the power of the purse refers to Congress's ability to cut off funding to certain executive agencies if those agencies are behaving badly. Now, the president also has a very important checking power, and the Constitution gives the president the power of veto. Now, veto is a word that comes to us directly from the Latin, and it literally means I forbid. So whenever Congress passes the law, the last step to get it made into a law is to hand it to the president so the president can sign it. But if the president is convinced that Congress has overstepped its bounds with this law, then the president can veto it. Now, the Supreme Court wasn't given any checking powers in the Constitution, but that doesn't mean the court wasn't scrappy enough to go get some checking power for itself. And that happened in the land landmark case of Marbury versus Madison in 1803. Now I'm going to have a whole video on Marbury versus Madison, but all you really need to know here is that that case established for the Supreme Court the checking power called judicial review. And all that means is that it's the prerogative of the Supreme Court to be the final interpreter of the Constitution. And in practice, all that means is that the Supreme Court has the power to declare an executive action or a congressional law as unconstitutional. Okay, can we just stop for a minute and appreciate just how nuanced and complex and marvelous is the separation of power in our Constitution? And that division is one of the most magnificent means of upholding liberty that has ever been devised. And it is held together through some incredibly tumultuous seasons in our nation's history. And at every point where you would expect the Constitution to fall apart, whether it was because of the tension over the slave states and free states and westward expansion, or the Civil War itself, or the tensions over civil rights, it is held together. Now my question is, how is that possible? Well, the first answer is that the Constitution holds together through these things because it is intentionally ambiguous in certain passages. For example, I mentioned the necessary and proper clause earlier. So who gets to decide what is necessary and proper as Congress goes about discharging its enumerated powers? Well, Congress gets to decide that, and every Congress in each succeeding generation gets to decide what is necessary and proper for themselves, and that is what the framers intended. Or let's take the Commerce Clause, which gives Congress the right to regulate interstate commerce among the several states. What does that mean, among the several states? Well, it has been reinterpreted over the generations, and that is a good thing because that means the Constitution can continue to govern us in all generations. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that the Constitution just means whatever we want it to mean in every generation. I mean, that can't be true. We have to be as faithful as we can with it while still navigating the ambiguities that were left there on purpose. But the goal is that we wouldn't stray too far because that's what the separation of power is for and the system of checks and balances. The second way the Constitution is able to hold together over time is because it provides the means for its own amendment. In Article 5, the Constitution lays out the formal process for amending its contents. And that is a very good thing because while the founders were no doubt unusually brilliant, they were not gods. In fact, listen to the way Thomas Jefferson says it in a letter to James Madison. He says, "Some men look at the Constitution with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant, too sacred to be touched. They ascribe to the men of the preceding age a wisdom more than human, and suppose what they did to be beyond amendment. I knew that age well. I belonged to it and labored with it. It was very like the present. Let us not weakly believe that one generation is not as capable as another of taking care of itself." Tasty. And just so you know, the process given to us in the Constitution for making amendments involves a two-step process: proposal and ratification. A constitutional amendment can be proposed by Congress, and the only way that will happen is if 2/3 of Congress agrees on it. Alternatively, a constitutional amendment can be proposed by 2/3 of the state legislatures, supposing they all come together and agree on it. But just so you know, this method has never occurred. And once an amendment is proposed, it must then be ratified by 3/4 of the states. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is in a nutshell how the Constitution works. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Alright, thanks for watching. Now, you may not know it, but you have been granted exclusive powers by YouTube to make sure that this video reaches as many eyes as possible. And the way you discharge those exclusive powers is by hitting the like button. And if you'd like to enumerate the powers of this channel, then subscribe, and I'll do my best to try to cram as much learning into your mind and heart as possible. And I'd like to know what you think about all this, so leave your comments down below. Bye.